Community Church Unitarian Universalist gathers in person and virtually in these unaccustomed times. Our purpose is to form a community to practice and advance a free and responsible search for truth and meaning as a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We believe we do not have to think alike to love alike. Ours is a faith in action, and we do the work of justice and compassion in our quest to live ethically. We welcome those who come in the spirit of love. You are welcomed here, as always. Our speaker today is Sally Jackson. Sally moved to New Orleans in the summer of 2010 and joined Community Church Unitarian Universalist in 2011. Since then, she joined the choir, served on the Board of Trustees as president, attended the UUA General Assembly as a delegate. She's taken the Shared Pulpit class twice and delivered the Sunday message on several occasions. I look forward to the things that go bump in the night. With our chalice lighting, let us sing the words that are familiar to us by Bert Brunson as we can.
Stuff up here today, but this is our call to worship, and I like to think of this as Halloween, football, pumpkin spice, and worship. That's what today is about. Yeah, that's going to be right after this. Okay. I'm so happy to see many of you here today. It's great that we can have live services again, but so difficult to find the time. We have the usual time, this will work better without that. We get so used to wearing them. We have the usual time-consuming distractions that happen around every autumn: Halloween, football, all things flavored pumpkin spice, the World Series, hockey fights, the start of basketball season, and this year, the all-too-familiar cleanup after a major hurricane. We've taken this time to be together to worship and enjoy that feeling of community that has taken such a beating during the pandemic. So let's enjoy this time together. You don't even need to keep an eye on your watch. The Saints play the afternoon game.
Sean Lote will share with us the stewardship moment.
Hi, everybody. I support CCUU because it's important for institutions such as this one to exist. It is important for the New Orleans community to have an institution that safeguards spiritual freedom and validates each person's identity. But it's also important for society at large to have institutions like CCUU, which truly champion diversity of ideas and experiences. Think about it like this. Outside of maybe a liberal arts college. Where else could you, in the space of a month, learn from a Buddhist priest, a Wiccan minister, a former Catholic nun, and a pastor who advocates for the LGBTQ community? Or, to speak from my own experience at CCUU, where else could you take a class called Evensong and be given an assignment to draw on paper what you think God might look like? The short answer is, well, there are not many places like that. And though it is small, it is important for CCUU to persist because the safe space it provides to the community and society is absolutely unique. And now I'll turn it over to Marianne with an update on the fundraising drive. Thank you.
Thank you for that perspective. That was really, really interesting. Well, let's see. Do we have a microphone here anywhere? That's it, huh? All right. Well, I don't know if you can hear me. You probably can, right? Can you hear me? No. Yeah, my voice doesn't carry. Okay. This is the button. Is it on?
It is. Yep.
It's on? Okay. Oh, I know. All right. You can see our thermometer. We're just beginning. Our goal is 150,000, and we did all right. Our first notices for you being able to give went out this Tuesday, and so far we have received $23,196 towards our goal. That's 16%. So let's hope that's a great start. And let's keep up the good work. Let's get it higher for next week. Let's at least double or triple it. Okay? Thank you. Oh, and I do have forms if you want to just go ahead and make your pledge right now. I have forms outside. Thank you.
Pumpkin Jack, written and illustrated by Will Hubble. When Tim carved his first pumpkin, it was fierce and funny and just perfect. A jack-o'-lantern this good deserved a name, so Tim gave him one, Jack. Long after the best trick-or-treat candy was eaten, Tim still kept Jack. At night, when a candle made Jack's face dance on the wall and fill the dark with warm pumpkin smells, Tim felt Jack was almost magic. Yet, too soon, the spell was broken. "This pumpkin is beginning to rot," announced Mom. "It's time to throw it out." Tim knew it was useless to argue. He carried Jack to the garden, which was filled with the brown ghosts of last summer's plants. A dead garden is better than a trash can, thought Tim. Still, it made him sad to leave Jack outside and alone. Whenever chores or play brought Tim to the garden, he looked at Jack. Every time, Jack was different. He became wrinkled, and his fierce smile began to look silly. Mold spread over Jack's bright orange skin. As the days turned colder, Jack grew flatter. Winter began. Soon, Jack was hidden beneath snow, and Tim forgot about him. The cold, heavy jacket days came. Snowman and sliding days. Indoor days. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Valentine's. When all these days had passed and the March winds melted the snow, Tim found Jack. There wasn't much left, just a faded and crumpled pumpkin skin a stem, and a few seeds. Jack's Halloween magic was a distant memory now. Tim scraped a thin blanket of earth over the last bits of his pumpkin. "Goodbye, Jack," he whispered. When spring turned barefoot warm, a tiny sprout appeared where Jack had been. Tim found it and guessed what it was. In the days that followed, Tim weeded and watered and watched the sprout. Slowly and steadily, the plant changed and grew. It branched and spread a web of vines over the ground, but no pumpkin appeared. The days turned hot. Flowers opened on the plant each morning, yellow stars that twisted shut forever in the afternoon. Still, there were no pumpkins. Finally, Tim found a little green ball growing behind a crumpled blossom. A pumpkin! Tim let out a whoop and ran to show his mom. By August, the plant had spilled onto the lawn. Tim's favorite game became pumpkin hunting. He carefully waded among the leaves, searching for green pumpkins like hidden treasure. School began again, and the days cooled. Tim had less time to visit the garden. When he did, the pumpkin plant seemed tired. There were few new leaves, and the old tattered ones no longer hid the fat green pumpkins. Then, one October morning, Tim woke to see frost coating the garden. The frozen plant seemed changed to pale blue glass. After school, Tim discovered what the frost had done. The pumpkin plant's leaves were as limp as wet paper. It was dying. Tim searched among the withered leaves for the unripe pumpkins. He picked them and put them on the front porch, hoping for one more change. By Halloween, the pumpkins had ripened to bright orange. There were many, for the plant had been generous. Tim was generous too. He gave away all but one. From jack-o'-lantern to seed to pumpkin again, the circle was almost complete. Now it was time for Tim to do his part. He gave his pumpkin a face. It smiled at him in a fierce and funny way. Tim smiled too and said, "Welcome back, Jack."
Happy Halloween.
The story behind the UUA Chalice, written by Reverend Charles Joy, the flaming chalice has become the internationally recognized symbol of the Unitarian Universalist movement, where originally only appearing as a device on letterheads and neckties, the lighting of a chalice, which is increasingly becoming a feature of communal worship in our congregations. The philosopher A.N. Whitehead said that real symbols have the power to change history. The history of the chalice symbol is significant. It began representing the religious courage of Jan Hus, a 15th century Czech priest who was martyred for offering communion to his congregants in defiance of the Roman Church, which reserved the sharing of wine to priests only. He was burned at the stake for this act. And Unitarian Universalists, too, have a history of being persecuted for innovative and democratic deeds in religion. Actually, more the Unitarians, especially in Europe. During the Second World War, an American Unitarian, Reverend Charles Joy, was stationed in Lisbon to help refugees from Nazism escape to safe havens. As executive director of the Unitarian Service Committee, he felt that this new unknown organization needed some visual image to represent Unitarianism in the world, especially when dealing with government agencies abroad. He commissioned a Czech refugee and cartoonist, Hans Deutsch, to design something that could be used on official documents, and thus an early version of the modern chalice came into being. Joy described what Deutsch had drawn in the following terms: a chalice with a flame, the kind of chalice which the Greek Romans put on their altars, the holy oil burning in it, a symbol of helpfulness and sacrifice. This was in the mind of the artist. I want to add, too, that Jan Hus is a recognized Czech martyr in modern Czechoslovakia even. I had a friend who was a physician from Czechoslovakia, and he didn't know anything about religion whatsoever, raised in communist Czechoslovakia. Anyway, but he knew Jan Hus, and he knew all about the story. Charles Joy writes, the fact, however, that it remotely suggested a cross was not in his mind, but to him also had merit. We do not limit our work to Christians, he wrote. Indeed, at the present moment, our work is 9/10 for the Jewish folks. Yet we do stem from the Christian tradition and its central theme of sacrificial love. The American Universalists and Unitarians merged in the early 60s, and versions of the symbol were adopted by the Unitarian Universalist Association and by the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches in Britain. It has since been used by Unitarian churches in other parts of the world. Unitarian values, insights from the present as well as the past. It is appropriate, therefore, that the flaming chalice symbol should have both ancient and modern roots, in both instances grounded in the principles of sacrifice and service to humanity. This flaming chalice is not only a symbol that is recognized by us. I know the stationery that the Caring Committee does, or membership uses, has a flaming chalice, and it's a symbol of Dali, the Indian holiday, Dali, I think it is. Anyway, and of course the Jewish tradition, the candles that burn for 8 days, and our symbol here, which has changed through years in many different ways. Thank you. Okay. Community Church is a self-sustaining congregation. The generosity of members and friends enable this congregation, as Mary Ann and Sean have just reminded us again, to fulfill its purpose, enduring the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can make your donations online at ccuunola.org/stewardship, or by texting 504-370-2659. Enter GIVE. All of this you can find in the Community Matters newsletter that comes to you in your email. For virtual donations, please note that there is a 3% processing fee. You can also, of course, mail a check to the church at 6690 Florida Lee, 70124. Congregation is invited to put their gifts in our offering dish. Your support is appreciated, as always. Thank you. The Munsters. This is a sacred time for sharing the joys your joys to be celebrated and your sorrows to be held. As you entered, there were cards, note cards from which you could write your joys and concerns. If you need one, Kathy's going to get us. Kat has some. Lizzie, I'm sorry. Okay. Does anybody want a card to put a joy or concern on? Besides the prayer that you don't eat too much Halloween candy. Cynthia will light a candle for those joys and sorrows that have remained silent within us. Is there another one? Thank you. I have no more. Sally has a reading for us you may recognize. was empty, I think. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it was empty. Joy just came home from weeks in Europe. Heidi Netherton, that is a joy.
Well, we're going to try to set the Halloween mood here. We've been having some great help from Nicholas on it. But it is kind of bright in here. So I thought an appropriate thing to do would be to read a poem that will set an appropriate mood. Thank you. My best lighting is moonlight and our candle, but
Just get this stuff out of here.
all right. This is one of my favorite childhood poems. Yep, childhood. It's The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. We're going to get into the mood. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping on my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December. Each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," I said, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was, I whispered the word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see." Then when the threat is there and the mystery explore, let my heart be still a moment and this mystery explore. "'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord and lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Thou thy crest be shorn and shaven, though," I said, "art thou no craven? Ghastly grim and ancient ravens wandering from the nightly shores, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relatively bore. For we cannot help greeting, and no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is the only stock in store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hopes that melancholy burden bore of never, never more. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy into fanciful, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er. But those velvet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press on nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and empathy from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff, kind empathy, then forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whose tempter sent on whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on the desert land enchanted. On this home by Homer haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by thy heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distance Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven never flitting, still is sitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Chalice just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that in dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor. Okay, it's still not dark. All right. Let me see where we are. Okay. Now we're going to do the actual sermon, my message for today. And my message is simply called Things That Go Bump in the Night. How can you tell that it's October in New Orleans? The leaves haven't turned color. Well, not on the trees that are still standing. The mercury is still bouncing around to the 90s for most of the month, but the signs are still there. The TV schedule has been all monsters, witches, ghosts, and ghouls. Stores are selling the new fall lines, and pumpkin spice permeates the air and everything that you eat or drink. Not a true sign of the season, as it happened about mid-August. By the way, have you tried the new pumpkin spice ranch dressing? Just wondering. Let's look, not too seriously, about how Halloween became the time of horror And by that I mean the socially acceptable form of the widespread extortion of payments in candy to protect your property. Trick or treat seems to go back to an ancient Celtic tradition during this time of year where groups would sing outside a house and would be rewarded with food, much like the "we will come a-wassailing" in around Christmas. Later it became a demand. Trick or treat could be translated to make your protection payment or you will suffer the consequences. You know that the threat is real. They are all wearing disguises. Isn't it strange that people will willingly wear masks to get candy, but just try to get them to wear masks to slow a pandemic? People can be very difficult to understand. We have all been conditioned to believe that darkness is associated with evil and dangers, while light is always representative of goodness and safety. We reinforce this mythology by leaving nightlights on in children's rooms. In actuality, a nightlight in older folks' rooms is a pretty good idea to protect them from chairs, tables, lamps, and shoes that are prone to jump out of the dark to trip them on their way to the bathroom. But let's just admit that those things were already there in the light. Our eyesight and memory fails us when we are only half awake. The title of this message actually comes from an old Scottish prayer. Lucky people, you get to hear my Scottish brogue again. From ghosties and ghoulies and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night, good Lord, deliver us. Okay? There you go. Thank you. I'll do the rest of the sermon that way. Let's go straight to the things. No, let's go straight to the things that go bump in the night. We've all heard strange noises in the night. How many times have you gotten up to investigate them and found nothing out of place? Good, it's not just me. Okay. The logical explanation is that you dreamed the sound and it woke you up. But why did you dream a loud noise? Well, that's the question that we never ask ourselves because it might be taking us to a place that we really don't want to go or even think about. I grew up in a house that we thought was haunted. The ghost was a lady. I learned to sleep anyway because she apparently walked through the house and stood by the side of my bed every night. I learned to sleep anyway because she didn't seem to mean me any harm. Incidentally, I was the only one in my family who never saw her. Old pier and beam houses settle, and that was what I was always told until my father saw her walking through the house. If I lived in the room with a ghost, what could possibly frighten me? Those noises. I heard things falling. I got up and nothing had shifted at all. It happened almost every night. I never could find anything out of place. The only place that I never looked was the closet. Its door was next to the head of my bed. It was a storage room for whatever had been stuffed in there from when the room was changed from a study to my bedroom. I was sure that the noises came from that closet, but why would it happen every night at about the same time as the footsteps stopped by the side of my bed? Fear can be a crippling force, and for me it was. I never looked inside that closet. I just blocked the door, and I used items available to me to protect me from whatever lived within. To a child, a good blanket is a great cloaking device. When pulled up over your head, with only a small opening for your mouth and nose, you're invisible. And to that, a veritable army of stuffed animals, stalwart defenders of mine. Mine included the usual teddy bears, and I even had a dinosaur. My champions. Even with all of this protection, I still laid in bed awake and frightened for several hours a night. I guess I still do. I don't really feel frightened, but I seldom fall asleep easily. All of us have done the same thing to avoid things that frighten us. I blocked the closet door against those sounds in the night. I did the same thing about dealing with my gender identity. Finally opened that door, but about 53 years after I had recognized the problem. But there are those who would say, I believe they're called metaphysicians, that would say that that was the future me that was watching over the frightened little girl that everyone else thought was a frightened little boy. Let's realize that most of our fears are based on one thing, the unknown. We fear the unknown, and yet we must face it to ever progress. Which brings us to zombies. Don't ask how, it just does, okay? They're all over the TV in the movies and apparently on most people's minds. Zombies need to progress. They are so slow that most people find it amazing that they ever catch up with anyone. But as we have become more and more desensitized to zombies, what's left for us to fear? Okay, here's a thought for you to ponder while watching the scare fest that's October TV. What if the zombies attacked a few world-class athletes? Just imagine the running, hurdling, pole vaulting dead. Or even worse, a zombie that runs a 4.40 and has the mindset of a linebacker. It is football season, after all. It all sounds pretty comical, the sort of thing that only children would actually fear, unless we look back into less enlightened times. I wonder how enlightened our times really are, but that's a different topic. Imagine that you're living in a time where all around you seems to be chaos. Not that difficult at the moment. COVID is still hanging around. We're still digging ourselves out of the rubble from the Hurricane Ida. And of course, no movement in Congress to repair our crumbling infrastructure. Two of those three things are plaguing people outside of Ida's path of destruction. Let's look at a period of fear in the birthplace of our religious tradition, Transylvania. My favorite. Okay. It's no surprise I was drawn to this religion, is it? Let's consider the location. Heavily wooded, mountainous, and being an agrarian society, not much light at night, and even in the towns and palaces, only candles and torches who were supplying light. Wolves actually do inhabit the forests throughout Europe and are known to wander into herds of sheep for a late night snack. It would be easy for a lonely and frightened shepherd to imagine that the shapes seen in the shadows were larger than wolves and possibly standing erect like a biped. A logical explanation for the legends of lycanthropy throughout that area, but that takes so much of the fun out of the folklore. Oh, you're going to hear another dialect now. Even a man who's pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Sounds like another ancient tale handed down by the gypsy tribes that roamed throughout Romania, and even more so when it was recited by the great Maria Ospengaya as the old gypsy fortune teller. In fact, it was written by the Polish-American novelist and screenwriter for the 1941 film The Wolf Man. Kurt Siodmak, along with the unforgettable line that he wrote that was uttered by Lon Chaney Jr. "You don't understand, I turn into a wolf." I've never been able to figure out what the difference is between wolf and wolf, but it's too late to ask Lon about it now. Or maybe not. The beginnings of the vampire legends are attributed to Vlad the Impaler. Actually, Vlad III, Dracula. Dracula means son of Dracul, from the Latin word for dragon. Okay. And that Bram Stoker based his book Dracula on the life of Vlad III. There's no connection other than the name. Dracula was a count, while Vlad III was a military governor charged with holding back the Ottoman Empire in their expansion efforts. He was the military governor 3 times, so you could make the connection to the undead returning for another go, but that's just conjecture. The interesting part is how Vlad got his nickname, the Impaler. He was a cruel man who seemed to have no problems when conducting torture. Most notable would be in his retreat from battle, where he left the bodies of the enemy soldiers on stakes along the way. Some were already dead, others exsanguinated on the stakes. That could easily lead to folk stories of drinking blood. There are folk tales from all around the world. Wherever there's a dark and mysterious woods or still body of water, stories of Bigfoot sightings. Yetis in the Himalayas. In Ireland, a banshee's screaming signals an imminent death. While in Germany, it's the Valkyrie who take the dying to Valhalla. A monster in a lake in Scotland. And let's just face it, there are stories about giant catfish at the base of Hoover Dam. And just as every lake with a patch of dirt in it has a goat island, They also have a strange creature that has lived there forever, and yet no one has ever seen it. In every forest, there's a cabin that seems to be the exclusive place for witches to go get their baked children. And if you are producing a weekly series like Kolchak the Night Stalker, you just might run out of monsters. So make them up along the way. And the folklore to support them. If you want a swamp creature from right here in New Orleans, you want to make it sound Cajun. And that's what they did for their episode, The Spanish Moss Murders. Okay, New Orleans there, right? They called it the Parlement Fait. Word they thought sounded good. And it does sound Cajun. And those are all fine, but not for Halloween. Too remote. Halloween is for more mainstream monsters. They have to come to us. We'll only cart that heavy bag of candy so far. As children are afraid of the dark, but not too afraid to wander around in the dark and knock on strangers' doors to get candy. Didn't we teach them not to accept candy from strangers? Somehow the fear of the dark and all of the lectures about accepting candy from strangers drift away into the deep recesses of their minds for this night. Apparently being dressed as a monster makes you immune to attack. Where that idea comes from, I have no idea. Haven't they ever seen Frankenstein versus the Wolfman, Godzilla versus Mothra, Rodan, the Smog Monster, Mega Godzilla, King Kong, and anything else I can think of? One particularly low-budget film pitted Dracula against Billy the Kid. Anybody else see that one besides me? No, not surprising. Anyway, so disguising yourself as a monster doesn't seem to be too effective, but we've pretty much removed logic from the formula for Halloween. How did this date become synonymous with evil doings and such activity that would bring so many monsters together? It does coincide with any number of pagan rituals because of its time after the last harvest and the beginning of the long winter nights. They're much longer than in summer. We know why, but to the average farmer in those days, why wasn't important. Surviving the winter was the priority. Not only did they have to survive on the food that they had held back after the harvest, but also they had to deal with heating their homes without the benefit of electricity or natural gas. And lighting was mostly candles, unless you could afford an oil lamp. Winter was not a season off to go skiing. It was a struggle. And those kind of struggles and conditions can turn the smallest sounds into explosions and a shadow into a monster. Very difficult times to remain rational, so the folk stories were told and legends grew. It was ever more daunting to have any feelings of security, so how to deal with it? The age-old solution. For frightened people, there is safety in numbers. Into the public houses, at first probably pretty quiet, just sitting huddled in small groups around the candles and lanterns, waiting until the witching hour had passed before going home to sleep. What exactly was the witching hour? The witching hour? It's midnight, but did that mean midnight as in 12 o'clock or midway between dawn and dusk? Well, it doesn't really matter. At some point, they felt that it was okay to leave, and they extinguished their lights and went home. But what does any of this have to do with our chalice? I wish I hit the rest of the pages. I do, don't worry. I said that this would be a lighthearted look into Halloween and how we started the chalice lighting. We've already heard the factual origin, and now to paint a bit of a fanciful picture of just how Halloween, or at least the winter months, could have played a part in the formations of not only our ritual, but our religion as well. We have groups of people gathered together around small lights for hours, and about every night for almost 4 months, they're bound to start talking. At first, just about the horrors surrounding them each night, until someone decided it'd be better to talk about something else, anything else. They probably started out talking about what crops might work better in different fields, working neighboring parcels together for a more abundant yield, and then moved to the weather when it was in season. But having solved the problems of agriculture and realizing that the weather was beyond their control, they turned how to brew a stronger ale. The culmination of that project no doubt led to the discussions about their stations in life and how they would run things if they were in charge. This was often followed by deep philosophical discussions and even arguments about religion. Is this beginning to sound a little bit like our coffee hours? Let's look at that. A group of people brought together in a sense of community to feel safer and then into the exchanging of ideas and principles. That does sound like us. As time passed, these gatherings became less about hiding in fear from those things that go bump in the night, and more about lively discussions on just about any subject. This was the building of true communities, no longer just about the discussions and more about the people themselves. I'd like to think that those discussions continued for years and evolved as all things tend to do, and eventually became the basis of our gatherings. It makes perfect sense. We started as a group breaking away from the traditions of the Christian churches, not recognizing the Holy Trinity and following a truly monotheistic ideology is how we arrived in the name Unitarian. Okay? But we didn't stop there. We decided very much in the spirit of those earlier gatherings to embrace other ideologies, welcoming the Universalist with their more humanistic approach. We continued to embrace any ideology that coincided with our principles. That includes numerous religions, denominations, as well as many pagan belief systems that were based around nature, all contributing their particular approach to our 7 principles. It's getting to be pretty easy to see what we do here each week could well have evolved from those first gatherings around the candles to ward off the evil spirits of the night. We've come a long way since then. We light our chalice as part of the welcoming ritual now, not to ward off those ghoulies, ghosties, and long-leggedy beasties. And at 11 in the morning, certainly not the things that go bump in the night. We light it as a tradition started long ago to provide the warmth of community, not protection. We welcome everyone with open minds and hearts and make them feel comfortable within this space and beyond. I wonder how in those first meetings they ever decided it was safe to extinguish their flames. Here it's easy. Not only is it the middle of the day and the flame may be extinguished without summoning the darkness, but the warmth of community always remains. All right. And our benediction is things still go bump in the night. We no longer pray for protection from ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties, but there are still those things that go bump in the night. We can usually find a logical explanation for them, but maybe we should just accept them as being wondrous and possibly even wonderful things. So many things in this world are wonderful, and even some of the things that we think of as being nothing but obstacles have their place and beautiful purpose. Bees can sting you, but they also make a delicious and healthy sweetener. Go out and discover a few more of these inconveniences that hide their beautiful purpose as you continue along life's journey.
Chalice. Nicholas. It took me a while to recognize that.